In Old West history, few figures stand as chilling and notorious as Cullen Baker. His name resonates with tales of violence and lawlessness, earning him an even more terrifying reputation than legendary gunman John Wesley Hardin. In this video, we dive into the life and crimes of Cullen Baker, a man whose merciless exploits left a haunting mark on the treacherous frontier. Remember to hit the like button because it helps us a lot. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the notification bell to not miss the upcoming interesting videos. Cullen Montgomery Baker was a mean, cold-blooded, and ruthless killer who left a long trail of bodies across the American frontier. Having served as a Confederate guerrilla during the Civil War, Baker's thirst for violence persisted even after the war's end. He ambushed the reconstructionists, targeted former slaves, and spread terror across Texas and Arkansas over the course of 4 years. Born on June 22, 1835, in Weakley County, Tennessee, Cullen was the son of John and Elizabeth Baker. His father was an honest farmer and owned cattle as well as working in the fields. The family relocated to Clarksville, Arkansas, shortly after his birth, and then moved to Texas in 1839, settling in Davis County. There, his father received a land grant of 650 acres. Though they had received the acreage, the family was still poor, and because of his homespun trousers and bare feet, Cullen was teased by students at school. Although he was a slender and introverted young boy, he began standing up for himself and took up practice with an old pistol and a rusty but functional rifle, becoming remarkably skilled with both weapons. He took his first drink of whiskey when he was just 15 years old and began to challenge both boys and men who annoyed him to go for your guns. His quick temper and love for alcohol frequently landed him in saloons, where he would find himself embroiled in numerous brawls. He was generally described as a hard drinker, a braggart, quarrelsome, and mean-spirited. During one fight, he was knocked unconscious by a man named Morgan Culp, who had hit him in the head with a tomahawk. This incident seemingly calmed his temper for a little while, but it wouldn't last. Some weeks later, precisely on January 11, 1854, Baker, still nursing a bandaged head, entered into marriage with Martha Jane Petty, a 17-year-old. They settled into a serene farming life, but Baker's discontent with routines resurfaced a mere 8 months later. One fateful night, while indulging in alcohol, he engaged in a heated verbal clash with a young man named Stallcup. Baker became enraged, grabbed a whip, and beat the boy to near death. There were several witnesses to the incident, and Baker was soon charged with the crime. One of the witnesses, Wesley Bailey, was confronted by Baker at Bailey's home. Baker shot him in both legs with a shotgun and then left him lying in front of his house. Bailey died a few days later. Before Baker could be arrested for the murder, he fled to Perry County, Arkansas, where he stayed with his mother's brother, Thomas Young. This fugitive life persisted for almost 2 years until 1856, when he fatally stabbed a man named Wortham during a horse-related dispute. Baker hastily returned to Texas, but news of his ongoing murder charges forced him back to Arkansas. In his absence, his wife Martha gave birth to their daughter, Louisa Jane, on May 24, 1857. The following year, Baker briefly returned to Texas to retrieve his wife and child, but tragedy struck when his wife passed away on July 2, 1860. Baker went to Sulphur County, Texas, where he left his daughter to his wife's parents. He never saw his daughter again. In November 1861, he joined Company G of Morgan's Regimental Cavalry to fight in the Confederate Army. In July of 1862, he embarked on his second marriage, tying the knot with Martha Foster, who was unaware he was wanted for murder. It is claimed he shot and killed at least 3 African Americans, killing a black woman in an immigrant train and later shooting a black boy 6 times with a pistol after taking the oath of allegiance and becoming an overseer of freemen. By 1864, he had either been discharged or deserted, and he joined a group called the Independent Rangers, loosely associated with the Confederate Home Guard. It was intended to pursue and capture deserters from the Confederate Army, but more often than not took advantage of most of the men being away at war, leaving mostly elderly men, women, and children. This left the door open for acts of intimidation, rape, theft and violence for groups of well-armed men like the Independent Rangers. Shortly after Baker joined the Independent Rangers, they began an ongoing feud with another band called the Mountain Boomers. But by the end of that year, the Boomers had been driven out or forced to disperse due to several of their members having been killed by the Rangers. In November 1864, Baker led a group of Rangers to intercept a band of Arkansas settlers, mostly older men, women, and children, who had fled Perry County, Arkansas for a better life out west. Baker allegedly considered this unpatriotic, but more likely than not, his motives were simple robbery. The Rangers caught up with those fleeing settlers as they were crossing the Saline River somewhere in the Wichita Mountains, but when the settlers refused to return, Baker drew his pistol and shot and killed the group's leader. With assurances from Baker that he would not kill anyone else, the remaining settlers returned to Baker's side of the river, where he quickly led his Rangers in shooting and killing 9 other men. The event became known locally as the Massacre of Saline. By that stage of the war, the Union Army occupied most of Arkansas, with several troops under the command of Captain F.S. Dodge enforcing the law in the area of Lafayette County. Most of these Union troops were African American and despised by Baker. Toward the end of 1864, Baker was in a saloon in the small town of Spanish Bluff, Bowie County, Texas, when he was approached by 4 African American Union soldiers and asked for identification. Baker turned to face them with his pistol drawn, shooting and killing 1 sergeant and the 3 other soldiers. After the war ended, Baker organized a gang with outlaw Lee Rames, which operated out of the Sulphur River bottoms near Bright Star, Arkansas, committing acts of robbery and murder. Authorities credit Baker officially with killing at least 30 people, though many of those, no doubt, were killed by his fellow gang members. Unlike the romanticized versions of his exploits, the reality was that he killed most of his victims from ambush or in the back, and many with a shotgun, and he almost always had his victims outnumbered. Like many of the ex-Confederates who became criminals after the war, Baker was regarded as a hero by some because he opposed the federal occupation, but his record shows a merciless killer who killed anyone who angered him, regardless of their loyalties. In March 1866, Baker traveled back to Texas. Now on the run from Union authorities, he went on a killing spree during which he killed 2 men, W.G. Kirkman and John Sammons. Sammons had previously killed one of Baker's gang members, Seth Rames, brother to gang member Lee Rames. Baker also killed a local man named George W. Barron, who had previously taken part as a member of a posse hunting Baker. The gang was active in the areas of Queen City, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas during this time. On June 1, 1867, having returned to Cass County, Baker entered the Rowden General Store, where he found the store kept by Mrs. Rowden, after which he simply helped himself to whatever he wanted and left without paying. When the store's owner, John Rowden, discovered this, he armed himself with a shotgun and rode out to Baker's house. He demanded that Baker pay him, to which Baker replied that he would come back to the store in a few days with the money. On June 5, 1867, Baker returned, but instead of paying his debt, stood in front of the store yelling for Mr. Rowden to come out and face him. Rowden armed himself with a shotgun and stepped out only to be shot in the chest and killed by Baker. Baker fled back into Arkansas, and a few days later he was confronted by a U.S. Army sergeant and 1 private as he boarded a ferry. When he was accused of being Cullen Baker, after having told them his name was Johnson, Baker went for his gun, as did the sergeant. Baker shot the sergeant 4 times, killing him, with the private fleeing on horseback and reporting the murder to Captain Kirkham. Following his murder, Baker was pursued relentlessly by U.S. forces in the area. While in New Boston, Texas, on July 25, 1867, Baker became involved in an argument with several U.S. Army soldiers. A shootout ensued and Baker was shot in the arm, though he killed Private Albert E. Titus of the U.S. 20th Infantry Regiment. This resulted in a $1,000 reward being placed on Baker for his capture or death. He returned to Arkansas, and while in a saloon in Bright Star, he agreed to join a mob intending to raid the farm of a local farmer named Howell Smith. Smith had hired several recently freed slaves, which was considered inappropriate by much of the local population. During the raid, one of Smith's daughters was stabbed and another clubbed, and a black man was shot and killed. Smith resisted and a shootout ensued, resulting in several mob members being wounded, including Baker being shot in the leg. On October 24, 1868, Baker and his gang were reported to have been involved in the killings of Major P.J. Andrews, Lieutenant H.F. Willis, and an unnamed Negro, as well as the wounding of Sheriff Standell of Little Rock, Arkansas. By this time, Baker's co-leader Lee Rames had begun to doubt Baker's leadership and felt that his actions would lead to the downfall of the entire gang. Rames then defied Baker, who backed down, and the gang broke up in December 1868. All members except Dummy Kirby sided with Rames. He and Kirby made their way to Bloomburg, Texas, to the house of the Bakers' in-laws in January 1869. It would be there that Cullen Baker and Dummy Kirby would die on January 6, 1869. Exactly how they were killed is unknown. One version says that his father-in-law and friends laced a bottle of whiskey and some food with strychnine, and both men died from poisoning. Afterward, their bodies were riddled with bullets. Another version says that Thomas Orr, with whom Baker had long feuded, led a small band of men who ambushed Baker and Kirby at the Foster home, shooting and killing them. After the men were killed, their bodies were dragged through the town of Bloomburg and then taken to the U.S. Army outpost near Jefferson, where they were placed on public display. Thomas Orr was said to have collected some of the reward money offered for Baker. Baker is buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Jefferson, Texas. The town of Bloomburg, Texas continues to commemorate the event with the annual Cullen Baker County Fair, held the first weekend in November. Proceeds benefit the Bloomburg City's efforts to build a city park and revive tourism since the COVID-19 pandemic. Afterwards, some romanticized him for his defense of the Southern honor, but his record shows he was a ruthless killer who killed anyone who angered him, regardless of their loyalties. He is estimated with killing between 60 and more people, and authorities and historians alike rank him among the most ruthless killers who ever lived. Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.